Riley Leonard is 17th in quarterback rating, and Drew Aller is 15th. So there's 2 spots separating them. And honestly, that kind of checks out. Leonard is a bit better as a rushing quarterback, and Aller is a bit better as a thrower. And in the pros, those matter at different levels, but in college, they matter almost the same. So that makes sense then that they're so close. The next thing I want to look at is the wide receiver versus cornerback matchup, as corner sounds like quarter. So the cornerback has to be like the second most important position, right? I think so. Wide receiver Jordan Faison is 171st in yards per route run, and he's going against AJ Harris, who is 50th out of 836. It's just crazy amounts of numbers for college players. So there is the edge for AJ Harris. Harris is really talented. He can lock up in man coverage, and he is great in zone coverage as well. There's basically nothing he can't do. He is a very good player, super physical. He is liable to take Faison out of this game, and that's a big advantage for Penn State. The next thing we're going to look over is Notre Dame's pass blocking, where they are ranked 66th in pass blocking according to PFF grade, which reminds me, if I didn't say, Harris is 50th in PFF coverage grade. So Notre Dame, though, they are 66th in PFF pass blocking grade, and Penn State is a much better 7th in pass rushing grade. So that is alarming. Notre Dame doesn't have a bad pass protecting line. It's a little bit above average, but I mean, ever so slightly. But with that said, it is not going to be enough for Penn State's pass rush, because Penn State is about as good as it gets for getting after the quarterback. The next advantage, so that's 2 advantages for Penn State. The next advantage is the first one for Notre Dame, though. They're not going to get shut out. Is Notre Dame's 10th in run blocking versus Penn State's 29th in run defense, according to PFF grades. So Notre Dame will have the advantage in where they want to attack Penn State, because Notre Dame is going to try to ground and pound as much as possible. If they could run the ball every play, I think they very much would, and just rely on their defense and ground game entirely. So that is pretty nice for them. They have things working the way they want to. And Penn State, I think, is going to have some difficulties. 29th is still a great rating, but it's obviously not as good as their 7th in pass rush rank. The next advantage is for the other side of the ball, where Riley Mills is 76th in pressures versus Nick Dawkins, who is 268th in PFF pass blocking grade, and Sal Wormley is 298th in pass blocking rank. I should mention Dawkins is 268 out of 285, which is just horrendous for a center. And Wormley is 298 out of 583. So there are some players that are worse than him, at least. With Dawkins, there's basically not. Mills is going to be able to get after the interior offensive line of Penn State. And this could be a bit dicey for the Nittany Lions because they do not, I mean, not just they, any team does not want interior pressure. Of course, you don't want pressure from anywhere, but from the inside, that can really mess up your game plan entirely. And I think Mills is possibly going to wreak some havoc. So that's a second advantage for Notre Dame, which, if you weren't paying attention, that takes us to 2 advantages for both teams. The third advantage for Notre Dame is going to be with Junior T. I do not know how to say his last name. That's why I'm just referring to him as T. I apologize for that. He is 179th in edge pressures, or rather in pressures in total. He is an edge rusher, though. That's why I got confused. And he's going against Drew Shelton, who is 311th out of 601 in PFF pass blocking rank. So that is a pretty solid matchup for Notre Dame. 179th doesn't sound particularly good, but when you factor in that's including defensive tackles, edge rushers, linebackers, everything, that is a pretty good rank. And because that's, I mean, there's like, I don't know, 800 of the defensive tackles alone. So that's pretty good. Next, we're going to shift over to the Penn State perspective. But before we do that, if you enjoy this video, make sure you like and subscribe, as I'll be pushing out tons of football and later NBA content as well. And with that out of the way, the first advantage for Penn State is with wide receiver Harrison Wallace, who is 132nd in yards per route run, which doesn't sound amazing again, but Christian Gray is 405th in PFF coverage grade, which is a little bit dirty to him because he plays so much man coverage. Notre Dame is so heavily predicated on playing man coverage. They play it at like 50% of the time, I believe. I should have that number in front of me, but I forgot to look at it. But I looked at it for their last game, and I believe it was about 50%, at least for some of their players. So that is just an absurdly high number. 30% is the benchmark for like a high percentage in the NFL. Obviously, NFL and college are not the same, so it's going to be a little bit different, but to be almost double the percentage, it's pretty crazy. So that's 3 advantages for Penn State, though, and 3 for Notre Dame. The next advantage is with Penn State's 90th in pass blocking. I believe there's 136 schools in FBS. So that is the baseline. 90th, not too good then. And Notre Dame is 14th in pass rush. So that is a pretty stark contrast in skills. Notre Dame is thereby going to get the edge, as you could imagine, on this one, which takes them to 4 advantages. They have not as good of a pass rush as Penn State, as you can tell by them being twice as high as where Penn State is. But Penn State is notably worse than Notre Dame is as well. There is 24 rank separations between Notre Dame and Penn State for their pass blocking, and there is just 7 in the difference between their pass rush and Notre Dame's pass rush. So, with that said, there is going to be the advantage in the pass rushing department for Notre Dame, believe it or not. even with Penn State having a just ridiculously good pass rush, it's because their pass blocking is so poor, it's going to be somewhat negligible. So that's an advantage for Notre Dame that's rather large. The next advantage is for the run blocking aspect for Penn State's offense, where Penn State is 55th in run blocking and Notre Dame is 35th in run defense per PFF. So again, there's a pretty big difference. Neither is necessarily spectacular. I like to think that like being in the top 25 with the, top 25 ranked teams being a general rule of thumb is reasonable, and being 35th is just, a little bit outside of there, but being 55th, that's being reasonably outside of the good territory. So I think Notre Dame is really going to be having some edges on the trenches because, yes, they are going to allow a lot of pressure from the great defensive line of Penn State, but they're going to be controlling both sides of the run game, and they're going to be able to get after the Penn State pass blocking as well. The next advantages are going to be seen through the defensive line of Penn State, with starting off with Abdul Carter, who is 8th in pressures. He's going against Anthony Knapp, who is 529th out of 601 in PFF pass blocking. So he is horrendous. And that is really a tough matchup for Notre Dame. You have your worst lineman going against their best lineman. You don't want to see that. So that is something that is rather scary. What's also scary is that, so that's 4 advantages for Penn State, by the way. And if you weren't sure, we have 5 for Notre Dame. The 5th advantage is going to go to Penn State, just showing how competitive this matchup is, as Danny Dennis Sutton is 38th in pressures. He is going against Emil Wagner. I'm not sure how to say that first name. I may have said it entirely wrong, but I gave it the old college try. Wagner is 142nd out of 601 in PFF pass blocking. So there's a pretty big discrepancy between 38th in pressures and 142nd in pass blocking. Again, when we're talking pressures, we're talking defensive tackles, edge rushers, linebackers, you name it. So Dennis Sutton is going to have the edge against the tackle for Wagner as well. So there's really a interesting clash of styles in this matchup where Penn State has the edges and Notre Dame has the interior. So it's going to be interesting to see which one ends up being more successful. The final advantage is not really much of an advantage, but is just an interesting matchup. Zane Durant is 160th in pressures. He's a defensive tackle. He's going against Sam Pendleton, who is rough. He's 368th out of 583. But he's also going against Pat Coogan, who is pretty good. He is 90th out of 285 in pass protection. So there is not really a clear advantage for Penn State there, but they have a good defensive tackle that I wanted to list just as possibly being a factor. I won't be surprised if he gets some pressures in this game. It's just he doesn't really have a distinguishable advantage going into the matchup. So, with all this said, where do I lean? That is a great question. At the start of the, like, knowing of the matchup being Notre Dame and Penn State, I felt rather confident in Notre Dame. As time has gone by, I've veered a little bit more in the direction of Penn State, but I end up circling back to Notre Dame. I think that they have a pretty clear advantage at the safety position, which is not the biggest deal, but is something that can be advantageous, especially because they can help in the run fit and in pass coverage as well with erasing receivers. Penn State doesn't have the greatest receivers in the first place, so they can really erase them. And I also just think Jeremiah Love against this Penn State run defense could be really problematic for Penn State. So for those reasons, I do lean Notre Dame. I think this is going to be a very competitive, great matchup, though. Overall, though, those are my thoughts on the game. Be sure to let me know what yours are in the comments section, and also be sure to like and subscribe for more football content.